All right, here we are, people, back again. Eli, we're back. It's been 2 years. 2 years since the last time you and me sat down talking about the boys. It feels like everything in the world has changed, yet it feels like nothing has changed. New studio. We were still using StreamYard the last time that I had you on, recapping all of the boys season 4 back in the summer of 2024. God, what a long time it has been. I am, of course, Dom the movie nerd. Rizzy, we are here to recap every episode of The Boys season 5, its final season. It feels like it has been a million years since this show premiered, all the way back in the summer of 2019. We'll be doing this as our new weekly recap in place until we get to in order to tide us over until we get to the summer. But Eli, first off, it's been a minute since we've had you on, man. How have you been?
I'm doing fantastic, Dom. I'm glad to be back and glad to be talking about what I think is one of the most interesting shows of the modern time. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to hop into it.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because I had a similar discussion with Luke when we were talking about Stranger Things, like kind of as that was dropping around Christmas. And this is another show that, again, it feels like by virtue of the fact that even though it's only had 5 seasons, because it premiered before COVID and because it's had the whole for the last couple of years now, every season is premiered every other year. So like after 2020, the show would come back every 2 years. We had a couple of filler shows in between. We had Gen V the last 2 years. And then we had, they did that weird animated shorts segment that they released in 2021. That was a bunch of different short side stories that took place in and around the world of the boys. But it's kind of crazy. It's I want to take you back all the way back to 2019, at least for me, because I was one of the few people who watched the show when it first premiered. And I remember the thing that I've been saying, this is one of the few shows that I've recapped pretty much on every stage of the podcast. This and The Mandalorian were 2 of the first shows that I ever recapped when I started talking TV back in 2019. I think this was our 6th episode back when me and Chris were doing it. And the most notable thing that I remember about the show when it premiered was that it was only 3 months after Avengers Endgame, and already it felt like the tide was shifting in terms of superhero content and our own perception of superhero content. It's kind of crazy how we're still talking about the show all these years later, given all the pitfalls that have befallen the genre. But what do you remember when this show first premiered, and just kind of what your memories were how were you introduced to it, especially given that again, even in those early years of the pandemic, we were still steeped in the Marvel hype wave.
Yeah, no, and it's funny I've mentioned that. I think that was obviously you have Endgame, you have Infinity War, just basically the falling action from those 2 movies coming out, and the hype, and it seemed like superhero I don't know, culture seemed to be dominating the media landscape for at least a few years there. And when I first heard that Amazon was making a superhero TV show, I kind of was pretty dismissive of it. I was like, okay, we're getting a lot of content.
We've seen what happened with superhero shows of the past, and majority of them were not good. I mean, granted, this was a little bit of a different era because we'd had Daredevil on Netflix by this point, so it showed that okay, the TV shows, they were getting there. But in terms of full-fledged action and special effects to the level that the boys pulled off, it's needless to say, none of us could have possibly predicted that anything like this would ever be possible on a TV budget.
Oh, for sure. And I didn't know what to expect. I had heard really good reviews, and that it broke some of the typical molds of the superhero genre, and that was enough, especially to get me, I think, kind of interested. Where the superheroes are the bad guys. That was, I feel enough of a hook, especially following Endgame and some of the TV shows that Disney put out following Endgame that were a little lackluster in my eyes. So yeah. I think to see something that was I think more original, that actually had a lot more depth and layers to its character than just just good guys fighting the bad guys. I remember it hooked a lot of people across the internet, and it exploded. I don't want to say overnight, but
it was a big hit. It was one of the things that I remember in late summer 2019. This was one of those things where it was circulating big, and people were talking about it, kept talking about it. I remember watching the first episode, and I don't remember what it was, whether it was the tiny dude diving into the one girl, or a fucking Butcher fighting with Translucent, or the Homelander shooting down the plane at the end, and it's kind of impressive too how they saved the Homelander reveal for the end of that episode. The craziness, it's funny because I feel like this show has kind of become known for obviously it's bloody and ridiculous over the top moments, but It's kind of funny how like few of those happened throughout the first season. Like, because obviously, again, you just saw the graphic intro that I put up. The fucking them impaling the whale with the boat. That was season 2. Obviously, the tiny dude exploding and splitting the dude in half, and that's the kickoff for season 3. Which I remember by that point, it was funny because that was the first 2-year gap that we'd had between seasons. The way that season 2 ended, I'm like, is there even any place else that this show could go? Really? Because it felt like they still their bag of tricks by that point. And then it's almost like the showrunners were self-aware of that. So they dropped that thing in the premiere of season 3 to just be like, oh, you guys thought that we showed our bag. You ain't seen nothing yet. And that was the same season that we got Hero Gasm. So yeah, all of this reminiscing is to say that The Boys has been in our lives for a long time now. And we are in a vastly different spot than we were when the show premiered, where now it feels like superhero culture has almost all but dissipated. We just came off a year that was all about celebrating the originality of film, where we were spending, we just came off an Oscar ceremony where the biggest rivalry was between two of, while one is not technically original, two of what felt like the most original films ever made that were dominating the past year, that being Sinners and One Battle After Another, versus it felt like superheroes at the box office seemed to have like flooded to a halt, where even though it felt like Marvel had finally gotten their shit together after a lot of years of just putting out some very mediocre material, it just felt like it felt like too little too late by that point. And
Yeah, the time has passed.
exactly. And so it's very, very interesting to have tracked The Boys' progress, specifically in the last 2 years, where one of my notes that I have here in this initial section that we have here, before we get into actually the plot of what happens in these first 2 episodes, is evolution from superhero satire to social satire commentary, where I would say the biggest notable change that happened going into season 4, which we recapped all of 2 years ago, was that the show seemed to stop being poking fun at superheroes and corporations, and specifically the corporate machinations that kind of dictate our lives as such, that really dominated the first 3 seasons, and really transitioned into more so like political satire, the move towards Homelander's ultimate fascist takeover of the states, and everything that was going on with the Firecracker and Sister Sage characters, the continued, poking fun at pundits like Fox News, and all of that at the time seemed very heavy-handed until the election that happened only a few months after the show wrapped. And well, needless to say that I feel like, given, how The Boys pivoted in terms of what it was choosing to exhibit, the show's more relevant than ever, considering the fact that the show starts with, the humans that were being rounded up by the Supes at the end of last season when Homelander officially assumes control of the country, being put in what is it they call it? Freedom camps is what they're called. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's not dissimilar from the ICE camps that have been popping up around the country ever since Trump took over. So yeah, I just wanted your take on that, the whole like kind of how The Boys has transitioned across, the course of its run so far.
No, I agree, and it's something I especially give Kripke a lot of credit for, in terms of, he's mentioned, editing the scripts year by year, in between each season, about to try and stay relevant. And I think overall, obviously it started as this commentary on superhero culture, but really with the I guess the luxury of hindsight that we have, the show was always really a commentary on media, and just really, I guess, kind of an extension of politics in that regard, that kind of comes with it, and all the different aspects with it. I think that the show not being afraid to really pivot, like you said, from its original vision into something that frankly resonates with a lot more people, and that is a lot more relevant, especially nowadays with just the political landscape. They're not afraid to really have those uncomfortable conversations, and it's in my notes, and I'm sure we'll touch on it. But I really liked some of the themes that we saw with just these first 2 episodes, with some conversations that characters were having about where's the line between resistance, and when a government is doing something like this to its people.
Yeah.
It's one thing to succeed, but then what kinds of people will you be after the fact? Like, are you going to be any better if you use your enemy's tactics against them? And a lot of really interesting, I think, commentary that's very relevant to today. So I have a real appreciation for it, that the show's not shying away from it, and I think it's important to have, for sure. And I also think it's a bit ironic coming from Amazon of all places. But
I know, and that's been the joke. That's been the joke of the show since the beginning, is the fact that this show is, again, poking fun at corporations like Amazon. The fact that Vought itself was modeled after Amazon, but the show is airing on Prime Video. It's the goof of all time, to quote Pacino from The Godfather Part 2. And the thing that you were mentioning about hindsight is really, really, again, it's great, because I just remember being just beyond infuriated at the last season of The Boys and how it felt like it had just reached the end of its rung. Like, all the gags were getting so old. It was so heavy-handed, the political commentary. I'm like, why are we going this way? And now I'm like, yeah, like what other direction could they have gone? What other possible version of this could this have ended with? You know, the comics that these are based on literally ends with Homelander taking over the White House. So it's not even like this is that much of a deviation from the original source material. So the only really thing that I guess I have left to cover before we get into kind of the actual plot points that happen in this episode are two things. The gags, I'm still invested in the story, but the gags themselves, which again, the show is all about shock value, which is how can we come up with the most brutal, disgusting thing to put on screen, people getting split in half. I don't know if it's just by virtue of the fact that because it's kind of the same, they come to rely on the same type of gag over and over and over again, where just somebody gets burst in half and blood just covers another person. I don't know if it's just because a lot of its cheap imitators are started to use a lot of those same type of gags. I don't know if it's just that we've just overall become desensitized and that sort of, you know, kind of shock and awe as far as subject matter. But just for me, like, the gags starting to get old, like the one, like the when Kamiko gets ripped in half, but then she like gets carried out and you almost forget that like her entire bottom half is missing. It's like, it's almost like the show itself is just like kind of overlooking that and being like, yeah, the gags really aren't the centerpiece of the show anymore the way they were. And like, it's like, I still remember like fucking seeing that tiny dude sneeze and while inside that dude's dick and burst and open. And I'll never forget too, because we were showing a mutual friend of ours, Dalen, The Boys for the first time. He'd never seen it before. And that was the clip that we chose to show him. And I'm just like, oh, just so many great memories that I have from this show over the years.
Oh yeah, to this day, he still hasn't watched the show just because he thinks it's like that every single episode. So
I mean,
I think we did a great job.
Off. He's not that far off. Like, if that's the first thing that you saw, and then you were basically had this idea of, oh, this is what's going to happen every episode, and like the people who've actually seen the show can't really disagree with you that much. Like, I can't exactly blame him.
Yeah. No, but it's curious because on that topic as well, especially about the gags, I feel like already they've been used a lot more effectively this season. Yeah. You know, when you think of last season, the ending, like that final episode, I think really helped to save season 4. But if it didn't have that strong ending, I think, you know, without a doubt.
You and me, I think, both kind of agreed across the board that season 4 was the weakest season of the show so far.
Yeah, it just feels like that, you know, you think about the plot for all the other seasons, it feels like everything kind of progresses pretty naturally. But when you think about season 4's plot and how it moves, you know, already, I feel like it's already the least memorable season. Like, yes, there were some episodes you absolutely get the shock value, like the human centipeding himself. You know, that's, you know, that I'm scarred for life on watching that.
I still, even though it was one of the worst episodes, I still love the episode where they went to the farm and all with the killer sheep and everything. That was fucking hysterical.
And that's my point also is when you think about at least iconic episodes from that season, really the only ones that come to mind, at least for me, are the episode on the farm and then the finale. And everything else feels a bit hazy where you kind of remember some of the shock value. And I think what season 5 has already done pretty well is they've integrated the shock value with some of the big moments in the story where that it still impacts things. Where I think a big pitfall with season 4 was the shock value was really just shock value. And it didn't really impact things one way or another. You know,
season 4 felt like they had a really great through line in terms of like, okay, like we know we're gonna end this with Homelander basically taking over finally and getting the control that he's been seeking after, and the Butcher tumor thing, right? And the Butcher tumor thing, the tumor manifesting itself as the Jeffrey D. Morgan character, was a cool idea. And then the way that they built that twist was actually really, really interesting. And sure, if you figured it out up until that point, it's not the first time that type of story detail has been implemented, but the way that was built to was cool. And then everything else just felt like, it's like, we don't know what else to do with these guys all set around these characters. It's just like, okay, just business as usual. And it's going to end with the Empire Strikes Back ending of the boys losing before they boot and rally to come back for the last season. That's all that it felt like last season had going for it. This season, on the other hand, again, this is the last season. Eric Kripke has even said in interviews himself that he has had an idea for the ending basically since, I want to say, about midway through season 3. And he even said in that same interview that he's like, okay, I went to the writers during the writers' room and it's like, okay, here are the last 10 pages of the entire show. How do we get to here? And already just with the way that this season is kicked off, the building blocks that they're doing, the character motivations, where all the characters are at, picking up after last season, it already feels like, yeah, we are in the end game now.
Yeah. And I think the stakes have definitely never been higher, which you can really feel the tension with some of the characters' conversations where, especially kind of adding on the criticisms of season 4, it kind of just felt like a lot of the I guess, character conflicts that we were seeing, especially with like Annie and Butcher and a couple other people, it kind of just
Also,
felt like,
the
okay,
Annie Huey drama as well going on last season, with the potential love triangle with Newman and all that, because Huey obviously still like felt some sort of compassion and empathy for Newman despite all the shit that she had done, and obviously after Butcher literally ripped her in half too. That also didn't help. But the stupidity with the Starlight doppelganger and all that shit, and then Frenchie sending himself to jail because he felt guilty. I'm just like, well, like, what are we doing here? Like, what is the point of any of this?
It definitely felt like those were very forced decisions rather than natural, I guess, actions the characters were taking in certain moments. And I think, that disconnect just between season 3 and season 4, definitely, there was definitely a drop off. And that's why I was pretty nervous kind of coming into these episodes, was just because, this show, the highs are very high, but as we could see in season 4, it absolutely can be, it can have its low moments. So,
yes, absolutely, without a doubt. So, with that being said, let's get into actually what happens in these 2 episodes. First and foremost, yeah. I'll try to keep it relatively spoiler-free, at least for the first bit. But I'll let you guys know, once we get into spoiler territory, we are not going to hold back. But also, it's a TV show. Like, these episodes are both available on Amazon. So, like, what the hell are you doing if you're listening to us and if you haven't seen these episodes yet? But so basically where we left off last season, Butcher unfortunately gave into, his little, compound V cancer tumor that had basically been haunting him all season in the form of his fallen comrade, Joe Kessler, portrayed by Jeffrey Dean Morgan. He finally gave in after Ryan's powers manifested and he accidentally killed Grace. He gave in. He ended up taking the virus from them forcefully. He ripped Victoria Newman in half. He also kidnapped her husband, Samir, again, in order to fully engineer the virus. Meanwhile, Homelander basically completely took control of the country. He had the Deep kill the vice president, and then he also had Singer arrested for I don't remember what he had Singer arrested for, but he had the sitting president arrested for who was anti-soup for something and replaced him with a puppet. It also ended with the post-credit scene of him discovering Soldier Boy. And then as the rest of the boys try to go on the run, they're all captured and arrested except for Annie and Kamiko, who we see being recruited by Butcher at the beginning of this first episode in order to try and break Huey, and Frenchie out of a freedom camp, while Homelander continues to track them, but once again discovers that he is surrounded by incompetence. Absolutely no surprise. Black Noir is once again no longer speaking. The Deep is basically pulling an Andrew Tate, which is hilarious. So those are just 2 of the points that I wanted to start off with. So just overall general thoughts on the plot of these first 2 episodes.
I felt like the story progressed very naturally. Obviously we get the big shock right at the start. Okay, flight 37 or whatever the number was.
Yeah, that's a big thing too. Annie, finally, again, she has been threatened. She's been holding this video over Homelander's head all the way back since season 1. One of the defining moments of season 1 of The Boys, and really just a true indicator of like just how fucking awful these soup characters are, is when Homelander and Queen Maeve, after Homelander's dumbass in an attempt to foil a terrorist plot, ends up killing the terrorist and the pilot in the process, chose to let the plane go down and let everybody on board die rather than, even attempting to save them, because it would look better for their PR if they did that. That video ended up getting leaked out. It was recovered from the wreckage, and Annie had been using it as blackmail material against Homelander, basically since I want to say about season 3. That video was finally leaked. Finally, but of course, again, showing the age that we are in, of course, they immediately get it covered up as a deep fake, and they're like, okay, so this is actually not as important a plot point as we thought it was, or is it?
I think it is and it isn't, right? I think whenever you have big story points like that, or Chekhov's guns, if you will, I think it's always interesting when they are used, but you don't get the result you anticipate. Where, yes, the Flight 37, it seems Vought for the most part has it under control in terms of how they're impacting it, but I think it's only contributing further to Homelander's unraveling, and we definitely see that happen in these first 2 episodes, where he definitely seems more desperate than before, and almost like afraid, like genuinely afraid. Yes. So I think it's and we see in so many scenes already, just in these first 2 episodes, how everything is just eating away at him. And
I know it's
you know,
probably counterintuitive to talk about like Homelander, the more erratic he becomes, the more dangerous he becomes, considering the fact that that's literally been like the underlying tension of this entire show, is the fact that, again, the Superman figure, the Homelander, is dangerously unstable and erratic. And every time he flies off the handle, shit ton of people die in gruesomely awful, disgusting ways. We literally had an entire filler episode last season dedicated to him just torturing the people who ran the lab where he was experimented on, which had some hit or miss moments for me personally. I felt like that was kind of a waste. I'm like, we've seen this so different iterations of this so many different times before. Why do we still need this? But I think it's being utilized much, much better this season, really showing how not only is him being unstable and erratic make him more dangerous than ever, but also the fact that he is surrounded by so many people who are incompetent, the fact that he is actively failing, the fact that the Starlight movement is rapidly gaining ground, the fact that as much as he tries, Vought ultimately cannot cover up for the massive amount of just, danger that him and his regime pose to the general public. So all of that, it probably makes Homelander both the most dangerous and also the most like insecure and unstable and erratic that he's ever been, which is what makes just certain moments of him throughout these first 2 episodes just so unbelievably like really invigorating to watch in a way that I feel like it hasn't been for a while. Like 2 moments for me, obviously the A-Train moment, which we're gonna save that, and then obviously when he brings Soldier Boy out of hibernation and brings him in to talk to him at the 7, and Soldier Boy asks for Manhattan, and then the guy asks Homelander's like, "Oh, do you want a glass of milk?" He's like, "No, I don't." He's like, I would like a Manhattan as well. I am also an adult person, immediately thinking of the Mr. Adult Man from BoJack Horseman.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think I mean, obviously Anthony Starr acting was superb as always. He really, despite being the villain, really is the star of the show in a lot of ways, and the show would not be nearly what it is without him and his performance. I do want to give a quick shout out to the at least just the music and the sound department as well for this. I love how Homelander's theme has slowly you can kind of how it's slowly becoming more twisted, like the chords are getting sharper every time, where it kind of seems like he's deep in thought and on the brink of making some kind of decision, where I feel like it's a good representation for where his mind is at and how scrambled everything is for him. And I think that really just enhances the experience when you're watching him. So
yes, absolutely. Over to the boys real quick. So obviously the first episode ends with, again, Butcher. The whole first episode is Butcher rounds up Annie and Kimiko, and basically the 3 of them form a plan to bust out Huey, MM, and Frenchie. They largely succeed, but you can already see like all the dynamics between them is so different. Huey is a lot more hardened and is not taking any shit. Like, this is the most mature that I've ever seen and hardened that I've ever seen Huey. Because again, like, Huey's been doing this for a lot of years now. He's got some experience under his belt. MM is just like completely done. He is just like completely fed up and is, man, I don't know. It's funny because like a commentary on the physical appearance of these actors outside the show has been a source of interesting note, I would say, since the last season, considering that Butcher's job that of plastic surgery that Erin Moriarty got her got on her face at the internet, bullied her so badly about that she ended up like getting a reverse job, and now she looks better than ever. And also how Las Alonso, who again is known for being one of the most jacked people on the show, how he had lost a lot of weight between the combination of him losing a lot of weight and shaving off his signature facial hair. People almost didn't recognize him in last season and this season. Obviously, again, it contributes to the fact that, again, he's supposed to have been helping in a tournament game for years, but he is looking really, really skinny. And I don't know if I just still have residual PTSD hangover of seeing Chadwick Boseman and what he looked like right before he died, but every time I see a rather large, muscular black male on a TV show or a movie of any kind, and I see them losing that much weight, I get worried. I get real worried. But for now, I'm gonna assume that it is part of the character, given the fact that Mother's Milk is just at the lowest that he has been probably since we first met him, all the way back at the beginning of the show. And notably, the dynamic is things are not great between the characters, considering that they're kind of only working with Butcher out of necessity, given the fact that the Supes have literally taken over the states, and the only other option is remain in an internment camp or die. So they have to go with Butcher and his plan to unleash the virus and wipe out all the Supes. The only problem is, once again, it's like, okay, once the virus becomes strong enough to wipe out Homelander, it's like, what do they do about Annie and Kimiko? And now Butcher, since he's a Supe now as well. And also, notably, the fact that Butcher lies his ass off about, killing Newman to her husband, who is still working on the virus for him. And also, notably, the other biggest thing, Kimiko can finally talk.
Yeah, I go back and forth on whether I felt some of her lines were pretty corny,
Well, yeah,
especially
but
in
that's
some of
by
the
design. She
situations.
she literally said that she learned how to speak from fucking TikTok. So I'm like, okay,
Right,
that
right.
makes sense.
No, I think it's nice, and I think her, despite I think the character is handling everything pretty well. I do like her evolution. I like, especially the relationship we've seen with her and Frenchie this season, especially now that they can both talk. I love how even when she gets like emotional and erratic, she's
Mm,
still doing her signature sign language
right,
and everything, just
right.
because it's a little more natural for her. But yeah, no, overall, I'm pleased with the development and
Yeah,
some of the characters, and I
absolutely.
especially I really like the dynamics we're seeing. I have a few criticisms, just on like individual one-on-one relationships, but something else I wanted to kind of talk about was we're kind of seeing characters that have never really interacted too much actually interacting this
Mm,
season.
yeah,
There's especially a scene in episode 2 that comes to mind. But overall, I feel like we finally have a lot clearer picture of at least how the web of character relationships works
yeah,
with
definitely.
really everyone,
Yeah,
and I think working out pretty well. I do think when it comes to the character dynamics, there was some conflicts I feel like were a little forced in this first episode, which maybe could have sprung into something that could have maybe given more underlying tension throughout the rest of the season. But
right.
then a lot of those kind of plot threads seem to be resolved in episode 2,
Yeah,
which that's really my only, I would say, my major point of criticism with this
yeah.
season. A lot of
That
highs, but
it's funny because that exact point that you bring up is a big problem that I had with a lot of the CW shows where it felt like they would introduce this big overhanging like doomsday plot point that would end one season and then by the beginning of the next season they would just have it resolved. It's like, oh, so that
right.
thing that you told us was going to be important wasn't actually important. You were just suckering us in to make sure that we would watch the next season. And TV shows used to do that all the fucking time. And
Oh,
of course,
Lucifer.
well, it's funny exactly that you mentioned that because again, Eric Kripke was most famously known for Supernatural before this show, and Supernatural
Right.
was a show that this was more. It was more so guilty of that after he left, but Supernatural was a show that was notorious for doing that, just giving us these insane cliffhangers season after season after season. Given the fact that he's basically brought back the entire cast of Supernatural now between Jim Beaver as Singer, Jensen Ackles as Soldier Boy, Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Kessler, and now this season we've got Jared Padalecki and Misha Collins both coming in. So he's basically pretty much brought back the entire cast of Supernatural for this. And yeah, the other thing too, also as far as the dynamic between the boys goes, is Huey and Annie, and where that whole dynamic is flipped, where Annie almost seems to be on a martyr run similar to Butcher, where she's like, okay, like if is like, look, like I have been a soup long enough now and I have seen what kind of damage we do to everybody around us. Like maybe we do need to go. Maybe this is the best option. Like that things have really gotten bad and things are really effed up when Annie is agreeing with fucking Butcher of all people. Consider that those two have been button heads pretty much since moment one of them like basically realizing they were on the same team.
Yeah, and especially with how season 4 ended, I was that's something I was also very skeptical of coming into season 5, because it feels like just season 2 onwards, it just feels like a repetitive cycle of
Right.
Butcher does something that's really fucked up, everyone hates him, he comes back in, they kind of argue and bicker a bit, we're not going to work with you, Butcher, then the stakes rise, and it just becomes plan Z, they have no
Yep.
other option again. And it feels actually kind of refreshing to actually see it, where we're seeing a much, much darker side to Annie, where I'm sure this year on the run, she's had to do some really brutal things. Obviously, Gen V season 2 and everything,
Yep.
wish we got a little more exposition joined in with that,
Yeah.
aside from just,
Trust me,
oh, Annie murdered
I
some
got some
people. And
problems. I got some problems with the way the Gen V has been utilized within the whole boys sphere. But
yeah, but for the most part, I think Gen Z exposition aside, I think I like this side that we're seeing, because it kind of plays into what I was saying earlier with let's say even best case scenario, the boys win this, right? They defeat Homelander, they save the country. What kind of person is Annie going to be? Is that a person
right.
that we want to help to kind of see to a new future? Someone that's and it kind of plays into that gray line, right? Where is the line with all of this?
Yeah.
Are you any better than Vought if you're gonna win this way, right?
Yeah.
I really like the dynamics that we're seeing. I like how Huey is very, I guess, altruistic. He's very selfless, but also a bit naive in the realism with some of the
Right.
situations that they're in, where
Right,
there
which is
just
kind
really
of
is
ironic
no.
given the fact that this is, I would say, the most hardened and the most jaded that I've ever seen him. You know, like the facial hair. I'm like, damn, Jack Wade's been doing this for a long time. Jack Wade's like 36 this year. I'm like, damn, he's been doing
Right.
this show for a long time.
Right, and I have to give him a lot of props because he still seems at least the most pure of heart character despite everything he's been through.
Right.
And even though the scene he had with that one woman, I can't remember her name, was a little corny. I
Yeah.
think
Oh, in the internment camp right before she got her head blown off by Homelander.
yeah, I think it serves as a good. I think it serves as a good kind of just refresher for the audience as to where he's at with his character, and I'm sure it will play a much bigger role in the course of the season, where he's always going to kind of be the voice in Huey and maybe Annie's ear about the morality of what they're doing. And I think by the end, he'll play a very big role in whatever climax is to come, and supposedly doing things the right way. So
yeah.
But overall, I'm happy with Huey's leadership, and he seems to be the one really trying to motivate and Frenchie and everyone else.
And also big improvement for Frenchie this season too. Frenchie is back doing what he does best, which is making some insane chemical shit that's going to do unknown wanton damage towards the boys, in this case with the virus, where again, with last season, it really felt like they were spinning their wheels trying to come up with this like forced redemption arc for Frenchie where like he needed to atone for the sins of his past. And I'm like, isn't that what he's already doing with the boys? Like, I'm confused, like where we're going here. And that it was just a whole waste of time to me last season. Couple notable things so far as well in these first two episodes. No Ryan, he's briefly mentioned, but nobody really knows where he is ever since he disappeared after last season. Also, no physical manifestation of Kessler. It's interesting because obviously, again, with how last season ended, Butcher allowing basically the Kessler tumor to basically take over, like the fact that we don't see Kessler at all in these first two episodes does make me wonder, like, okay, it does make it more interesting and more ambiguous as far as whose hand is on the steering wheel here, Butcher or the Kessler tumor ultimately. I mean, and there also was that thing of what he was saying to Butcher at the end of last season as well, where his whole thing was like, look, I am you, I am simply a manifestation of something that is already inside you. So like, am I really this independent person? So like, it was very interesting how they chose to withhold, him. Also the fact that, I mean, obviously, anytime that I get a chance to see more Jeffrey Dean Morgan, I'm going to want to, especially it was even more rewarding how given that only 6 months after I finished seeing him possibly be the best part of that whole season, he just gets to show up and chew scenery as one-liners. He comes in and has possibly the greatest one-episode run of any episode of Invincible that I've seen yet as Conquest. And oh man, they did that part of the comic as well in last week's episode. I haven't watched this week's episode, but I'm like, there was something that I knew was going to happen when Mark met up with Conquest again, and then they did it. I'm like, oh, like that was the only time that I've ever seen like an animated thing like visibly make me sick. Like I thought I was actually going to vomit. But so there are those two things. And then this one, it's just Ashley. We got to talk about Ashley and just how she has just been the one-off joke character who, again, she survived her boss Stillwell from the first season, the Elizabeth Shue character. She survived Stormfront. She survived all of the wanton insanity. She survived the purging of all the human employees at the Vought building at the end of last season. She survived barely by injecting herself with Compound V. So we knew that she ended last season with injecting herself with Compound V, and we saw whatever the hell was going on with her head, but we didn't see like what her superpower was going to be. We start this season. She's now the vice president of the U.S. She's got hair that looks way too luscious to be real, so we can assume it's a wig. She's married to the new kind of evangelical preacher character portrayed by Daveed Diggs, whose name is literally Oh Father, and he basically turns into like the Reverend Rollo Goodlove from the Boondocks character at the beginning of the second episode. And then you get the reveal of what her power is. And it's literally, she's Professor Quirrell from the first Harry Potter, where she's got a fucking, like, dark, like second personality literally jutting out of the back of her head that she has to cover up with a wig, similar to how Quirrell from the first Harry Potter, for all of you guys who don't remember, had Lord Voldemort sticking out of the back of his head. I was cracking up laughing. I'm like, this is the best fulfillment. And to add insult to injury, the fact that the face on the back of her head is quite literally her, what's left of her moral centaur, her angel versus her devil. Like, I was crying with that reveal. I'm like, I was wondering, I'm like, is she gonna get something and say like teleportation, flying? Like, nope. She even says it because that's the other thing too. That the first 2 episodes have been great. We are in a last season run here. The show is very, very self-aware about that it is its last season, so it's paying homage and lip service to all of its previous seasons. And she's like, "Oh, I couldn't get any good powers. I had to get a talking tumor at the back of my head." So that reveal was just so good in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. What also is so interesting about this show is the negative consequences that come with superpowers. Where Huey just being able to teleport. Oh, he's not bringing his clothes with him. That's a major downside there.
Yep.
all these other characters, right? The super speed, just little things that I feel like really help with world building. Like A-Train needed to eat like 20,000 calories a day to keep up with what he does.
But in fairness, I will say that was first made a thing in the first season of The Flash, so I will give the CW some credit for that. Like, The Flash was the first time that I saw that mentioned, where it's like, dude, if you're running this fast, you're gonna burn up a shit ton of calories.
Oh, well, never seen it, but yeah, no, I just thought it was really interesting things, and I every superpowers that was introduced, I always love to see. I feel like that's kind of what gives this show its quirk too. Is these things wouldn't be as great to have if it was actually.
And it's funny
real.
because that goes back to the comics, because Garth Ennis wrote this comic specifically as a fuck you to superheroes, because he famously hates superheroes and superpowers. His whole run of the Punisher that he wrote was specifically to show Punisher just absolutely gooning the rest of these superheroes around him who have these crazy superpowers, and the Punisher is just running shop around all of them. And that's kind of part of the inspiration for the boys, is showing that, and that's been a thing. Again, that was kind of part of the appeal of it going all the way back to season 1, is the fact that, having these superpowers sucks and would kill a lot of people,
Yeah. I think also kind of what you mentioned on the idea of callbacks, I really like how this season they seem to be actually putting effort into acknowledging previous seasons more.
Yes.
It felt like season 4, I feel like even a good chunk of season 3, it feels like we weren't really getting a lot of bringing up material from the first couple seasons, where it was kind of just go on to the next thing. This season, we're getting callbacks, like Homelander just bringing up the first time that he met Huey, right?
Yep.
And how far they've come, and just why do people still stick around you when you're nothing.
Yep.
I thought that was a really interesting conversation. I think it adds that further layer. It makes the character relationships that more personal, and then you as the audience more invested.
Yeah.
I think I really like what they're doing, and I hope that that's something that they continue, especially for it being the final season, where you would hope they bring up a lot more elements. And it seems like they really are doing everything they can. While obviously these first 2 episodes haven't been perfect by any means, it seems like it's actually being made with love, rather than just hitting on all the the clips that can circle around social media.
Absolutely, 100%. And as well, too, it's like there was another really funny bit where when Soldier Boy corners Huey, and once again, says one of his insane, what's it called? One of his insane. Actually, I'm gonna try and find the meme, because it was absolutely insane. Where he's like, I'll just scroll through Twitter, where he's like, how is a cock gobbling useless putz like you still walking around alive? And then Huey's humorously like, "It's weird how all of your insults seem to revolve around dudes sucking off other dudes. Should probably get that examined," or something like that. So I just thought that was just hilarious. All right, let's do it. Let's have the discussion. A-Train, man, it's funny because I knew going in, I'm like, okay, it's the final season. There's still too many characters that are walking around alive. They have killed off a decent amount of their main characters, Stormfront, Newman. So they haven't been afraid to kill people, but it was starting to worry me a little bit that we were going to get to Stranger Things territory, and I'm going to be like, okay, we're on the last season, and all you've done is continue to expand this cast. Not a whole lot of people have died. You're not going to pussy out, because in the comics, when we get to this stretch of the comics, a lot of fucking bodies hit the ground. And thankfully, they established at the end of this first episode, they're like, yep, A-Train has achieved his redemption tour. It's time for him to go, where again, at first it seems like he's going to pussy out at the last minute when Annie recruits him to try and help them break them out. He ends up showing up. He distracts Homelander long enough for the rest of the group to escape. Homelander chases him down, and a very, very fulfilling moment, he almost runs down another girl who looks eerily similar to Robin, Huey's girlfriend, who we murdered in the first episode. Again, you want to talk about callbacks, and one of the best usages of a callback to fulfill a character's arc. He dodges her, slips, hits, injures himself. Homelander corners him, and he laughs right in his face, calls him weak and pathetic before Homelander snaps his neck. R.I.P. A-Train. R.I.P. to a real one. Man, who knew Who knew when this show started and A-Train was one of the most hated yet relatable characters because you understood why he was acting the way he did and why he was doing the way he did it. He came from a very poor, impoverished family. He had achieved seemingly the American dream, what nobody else had. He finally had everything, the luxury, and all the compound V he could ask for, and he didn't want to do anything to jeopardize it. And then people around him and close to him started getting hurt, and he started to finally understand that he was causing more harm than good. Again, probably one of the other best parts about last season was recruiting him, to be an informant. He'd always had like a back and forth, helping Huey and Annie out, occasionally out of relationship. But again, that was always done out of, like Huey guilt tripping him over everything that happened with Robin. And then A-Train finally apologized. So it's been a really, really interesting road up here. A-Train, probably one of the better arcs, one of the better characters in the show. Like after Butcher, Homelander, and Huey, I would say that A-Train's probably had one of the best arcs throughout the course of the show. So, I mean, it sucks that it happened at the end of the first episode, but I mean, if there was going to be a character death that needed to happen in the first episode in order to show, this season, there's going to be some bodies that hit the ground. I mean, I couldn't have thought of a better one.
I agree. And as much as we rip on season 4, I think the one thing, aside from the finale, I think one thing that season handled truly really well was A-Train's arc. Yeah. And that's truly the season where he was redeemed. And, you talk about like the scene where he saves where he finally feels like a hero for legitimately saving a life rather than just all the publicity stunts. That I feel like is more impactful than any superhero action scene or anything,
Exactly.
What I really appreciate about A-Train's arc is they really do fake you out for a while and they take their time with it. Yes. Like they almost, remember in season 2, they really make it seem like the Deep is really going to be maybe the bad guy that is going down the redemption path. And then they pull a 180 on you where the Deep never really learns his lesson, Exactly. And I think the biggest difference for A-Train and the Deep is, there's support circles, where A-Train, his family, obviously the family's his excuse about not trying to help Annie out and everything. But we see him, and I love that they were still able to bring his brother back for a scene this season where, his brother had always wanted the best for him. And it took his brother getting hurt and him getting cut off to actually truly want to change and try and be better, and midway end of season 3 to really kind of start that redemption arc for him, where
whole Blue Hawk arc too.
Right, where the Deep always lacked like the emotional intelligence to really learn from any of his lessons, and always just came back to the prostitutes and the fame and the having sex with fish and everything. Where I think that was a huge, and I think it speaks a lot about just something like that in the real world. It's something that you usually can't do on your own.
Exactly,
and I think that final scene between A-Train and the Deep is a really nice summarization of their two arcs up until that point, where the Deep has really just kind of been basically a wreath, whereas where he's never really changed, where A-Train has he's really gone up a lot of ups and downs, and I think that makes his arc a lot more fulfilling. And I think that final conversation he has with the Deep, where he's kind of real with himself, where like, we're both shitty people, but at the end of the day, we know how this ends, and I was at least honest with myself about it. And I think that is a very powerful message to leave the Deep with. And I'm curious if that will have an impact on him, but I almost feel like we already kind of know where the Deep's heading this season.
I was about to say, we already know. It's just the Deep is just going to keep fucking up like he always does, and eventually Homelander's finally just going to get pissed with him and just snap his neck. Like, it's just one of those things where, again, the Deep has been a joke character since the first season, and it's just, again, it's like you were saying, it perfectly situates it well, where A-Train is actually... And again, you can make the argument that this was established all the way in season 1, where the way that those two were established and introduced with the Deep, again, sexually assaulting Annie and then getting called out for it and rightfully suffering the consequences of it, and the whole rigmarole there, versus A-Train, who commits a heinous, despicable deed, tries to talk his way out of it and justify his actions, but is clearly feeling guilty of it. Like, it just makes sense that both those characters' arcs would end the way that they did. And really, man, it is crazy, my relationship with Jesse T. Usher leading into the show and over the course of the show, where, again, I just remember when they were assembling the cast for the show, and I saw that, and I'm like, wait, that's the dude from Independence Day and When the Game Stands Tall and that one video game, that Cartoon Network live action movie, Level Up. You remember where the kids basically had to deal with, you remember that movie,
yes,
right?
I
Where,
do,
the kids had to deal with the fact that all their the characters from the role-playing game that they were playing on live were coming into the real world and stuff. And Jesse T. Usher, that was the first thing that I ever saw him in. I'm pretty sure it was called Level Up. And man, seeing him, I'm like, man, already in the first episode, like why I figured he was a goner before like the whole final sequence happened is I'm like, oh, he just looks old and tired. Like he is on the level of MM. Like MM, unfortunately, I know is like it is just his mission in life. It is his lot in life to suffer. Just, you know, whether from Butcher, between his family, like he is just his lot in life to suffer. But I'm like, I have never seen A-Train look that haggard before, you know?
Yeah, and I think it makes sense, you know, whether that was intentional or just the actor himself, you know, him constantly moving his family around, being hunted by the deep and Black Noir. I think you know, it makes sense for the character. I think you know, he bowed out very well. I think you know, this has definitely been one of my favorite arcs of the entire show. And especially any show since COVID in general. I do love a good redemption arc. Jamie Lannister is always one of my favorite characters, both in the books and in the show for Game of Thrones. You know, Zuko. You know, when an arc like that is done well, and I think this is an example of it. I think it's very powerful. Yeah, and I think they really set out. I think they achieved everything they set out to do with this character. So.
I agree. Could not agree more. All right. So now the other big thing that I want to talk about that came off the last 2 episodes. So Soldier Boy obviously is the center of it. We knew that he was coming back, obviously, both from the post-credit scene established at the end of last season and then the trailer going into this season, but specifically his usage in episode 2 and also with the way that episode 2 ends and what that sets up for the rest of the season. I also have that as well down here in theories for this season where basically the whole premise around episode 2 is they have this virus, but they're trying to test it out and figure out like, okay, like how powerful is this thing going to be? So they decided to test it out on basically the Teen Titans group of Vought, which is a little bit confusing because I was like, wait, I thought that the Gen V characters, that was supposed to be them. But no, I guess it's this new teenage kicks group that's introduced, which consists of another flying dude, a humanoid cat, and a girl who controls ravens. I guess it's like, okay, that
crows actually, but...
yeah, crows, whatever. Same shit. I never understood the difference between them. It's like, okay, they're both blackbirds. Like, who cares? I realized I was just probably racist against birds there. I apologize, but anyways, yeah. So basically, Homelander's sick of the incompetence. He wakes Soldier Boy up out of cryosleep. He offers him a place in the 7. He offers to make amends. You know, Soldier Boy is obviously still pissed at him, but he's like, look, I didn't fuck you over. That was Butcher. I'm giving you a chance to like get revenge on Butcher. And also Sister Sage is whispering in his ear and be like, if Butcher does have this virus, and it's probably better for him to test it out on Soldier Boy than you know? So that happens. Soldier Boy corners them. What's it called? You know, there's a very funny bit where they get into the basement of the Teenage Kicks house. They discover that the 4th member of Teenage Kicks, Rock Hard, who is this giant, like, rock creature thing that, like, comes from watching lava videos, like volcanoes exploding on TV. Once again,
talk about absurdism.
Anybody who has seen The Boys, this is nothing new. For anybody who has never seen the show before, they're probably like, what in the actual fuck is this guy talking about? Regardless, they lure Soldier Boy in, they detonate the virus, they seemingly murder 2 of the members of the Teenage Kicks, the supersonic character and the Rock Hard character. There's this very touching moment where MM has this bonding moment with the Crow character, basically realizing that she's in over her head and that she's just a kid. He ends up letting her go. So that was a very, very touching moment. But there's a fake out at the end where you know, the boys escape, the virus has seemingly worked, Soldier Boy seems to be done. Homelander's there. He's grieving over the loss of his father, you know, but the camera's cutting back to the body one too many times. And I've watched enough TV. We've both watched enough TV to know when a fake out is coming. And that's kind of exactly what this was queuing us up for. And then literally right before the final moment of the episode happened, I remembered, I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, they can't kill Soldier Boy yet because they still have to do the Jared Padalecki and Misha Collins episode, because I remember there's a scene in the trailer where Soldier Boy, played by Jensen Ackles, throws Jared Padalecki's character up against the wall. And I'm like, oh, that hasn't happened yet. And right then, that's when, while still in the body bag, he sits up and the episode ends. And I can't go down. You know, that song that I don't know the name of cues it up. So discuss, like, what are we thinking? Because up until this point, like, we have pretty much been assured that the virus is the end-all be-all. Like, they just had to reverse engineer it to make it strong enough so that it would impact Homelander, but the fallout again was that it was going to wipe out every soup on the planet, you know, so there was all that. So that was the worry going into this. But now I'm like, if Soldier Boy's immune to this, both first of all, how is he immune to it? Second of all, what does this mean as far as the boys' plans, as far as dealing with, you know, the rest of the Sioux population and Homelander?
I was almost sold. For a brief second, I was almost sold, and I was almost thinking, like...
They did a good job. They did a very good job of making the audience believe that Soldier Boy was
I agree. I almost thought for a second, like, this was actually... They were actually going to kill him off, and this... the episode with Jared coming in was just going to be
A
some kind of flashback in
Right,
between
right.
the first and last season, or first and last scene with Soldier Boy, that would just set him up as the villain of the week, basically. But no, I was pleasantly surprised. I'm interested to see if we'll actually learn the exact reason why he survived compared to the other two. I think they did a good job of showing the brutality of the virus, and I
Yes.
think it just adds further to the stakes of the story, where the characters that we care about, like Annie and Kimiko, are what it could do to them. And especially
Right.
that scene, you want to talk about like the little moments. Like, for me, the little moments have been my favorite parts of these first two episodes. Not
Yes.
like, the action's great and everything, but I feel like really good stories are made in those small conversations with characters, like how Kimiko and Frenchie, how Frenchie is willing to go along with all this just so he can learn how to protect Kimiko. I think that's
Yes.
absolutely fantastic. And Kimiko, Annie willing to actually kind of go down the butcher route, and if I have to die to do this, then I'll do it.
Right.
I think it really speaks a lot more to the how drastic the situation is, and how every choice is that much more important when we're watching these characters advance through the plot. But I think Soldier Boy, I think it was a great debut episode for him this season. I think he's still the classic Soldier Boy, still trying to be all manly macho. And I think him finding out about the virus on obviously wasn't intended by Homelander, but I think that's gonna only lead to more instability with their relationship. Obviously, Homelander,
not exactly the most stable relationship to begin with.
No, not at all. Obviously, the fact that they barely even acknowledge each other as father and son, and this was more like a transactional thing than anything.
Right.
With,
well, considering also the fact that that Soldier Boy's reaction upon discovering that Homelander was his son was literally, "You're a fucking disappointment," which is, again, it's just seeing that, like, somebody who is to the level of, you know what it is that's so satisfying is, up until this point, the only characters that have basically, like, kind of openly acknowledged what Homelander is, like, the only character that's had the balls to say that to his face is somebody like Stan Edgar, who, again, the cojones on that guy, the fact that, like, he can stand up to a dude like Homelander and not be scared. But, again, the fact that, and what's so satisfying about hearing a character like Soldier Boy say that is, probably if there's one character that's more of an asshole just in a different way than a Homelander is, it's Soldier Boy. Homelander, again, is entirely motivated by his insecurity, by the fact that he needs everybody to love him. Soldier Boy's just a fucking misogynistic, old school jackass, racist, sexist, xenophobic, hard partier, calls even the most remote act of kindness, basically calls the person something heinously, but
behoof, a weakness,
exactly, behoof of weakness, but also at the same time is very, very obviously, like, one of the most obvious examples of closeted gay, just textbook, like, old school male misogynism. And what's so satisfying is seeing, like, those two polar opposite ends of just the worst people just absolutely hate each other and tear each other apart. I think it's part of why I think season 3 is still the best season of the show, because that specific dynamic was just so awesome to watch. The fact that the first time you ever saw these characters interact on screen, literally, and again, it's not by mistake that these are the two characters that are modeled after Superman and Captain America, respectively. The first dialogue interaction that they have is Homelander is like, "You are the only one that was ever as strong as me," and Soldier Boy's response is, "Buddy, you think you're strong? You're wearing a cape." It's like, what is it? You're wearing a cape. You're not strong. You're a cheap fucking knockoff. Like, already that was, I'm like, oh, I need more of this,
Yeah, no, I think great dynamic. Soldier Boy as a whole, I think, just is a phenomenal character for the show. Just he's our window into kind of the soups of the old, right? And kind of, in many ways, a part of the culture that led to where they are now.
Right.
And you can argue that Soldier Boy played a very big role in the where the times are at, so to speak.
Yep.
In terms of basically being the precursor to the Seven, and how all these superheroes are dishonest and immoral and just terrible people behind the scenes, like any good celebrity really is nowadays. But I think Soldier Boy, I'm just really curious to see moving forward how his relationship with Homelander is going to be. And I wonder if he's going to be that one of that basically that final nail in the coffin for Homelander, right?
Yeah.
We see Homelander just basically having that breakdown at the end. Why does everyone leave me? Why does everyone leave me? Even after A-Train betrayed him, and he still at least feels bad,
Yeah.
like, after
Like he
hindsight,
seemed to genuinely like miss him and be grieving for him at the funeral.
yeah, and obviously, for most of the show, we've seen Homelander just be ruthlessly awful to A-Train. So obviously as the audience, you're like, but from Homelander's eyes, like, is that the closest thing he's had to a friend?
Exactly. Not to
Just
mention the fact that given the way that given the quote unquote love that Homelander got growing up being raised in a lab, it kind of makes sense that that's how he would treat everybody, because that's how he was treated. That's his idea of, showing love and affection,
right. And I do love that little, like, heavy is the crown moment he basically tells himself, where just he's the hero of his own story, right? He just has to shoulder this burden and keep pushing through to make the world a better place, like how he keeps telling himself. But at the end of the day, everything is just a means to an end in order to try and either get love from just everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that every action he takes, it just leads to just more, right? He's always just trying to force love, right?
Yeah.
Just force admiration and just devout loyalty from people. And the fact that he just can never get that no matter what he does, and just how it eats away at him episode by episode.
Versus Soldier Boy just does not give a fuck. It just wants to just like, I'm sorry,
exactly.
two lines that immediately, like, I will never forget when I heard them. One was not in the show. One was a part of the those promos that Amazon did, to promote Soldier Boy leading up to season 3, and he's recording in front of the blue screen. It's supposed to be like some anti-drug message. He's sitting there laughing, and he's like, "Man, if drugs aren't cool, then I'm the most uncool motherfucker there is." Fuck you. And he just says fuck you to some dude off screen. And then the other one is when they first bring him back in the Hero Gasm episode, probably the best episode of the show up until this point, either that or the season 4 finale. And he's talking about, he's like, Bill Cosby, that was America's dad. Man, that guy used to make some strong drinks. And he was just sitting there being like, oh my God.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah.
Oh my God. I love Soldier Boy so much. Like, it's just like, I don't know what, like, Kripke, like, with certain characters is just firing on all cylinders, like Butcher, Homelander, early, like, establishing A-Train in the deep. But man, he was cooking with some special sauce when he was conceiving of Soldier Boy. Like,
I think it's only right that he made Jensen Ackles, Soldier Boy, just because you can tell this was a very special character for the show, and that they, something they really wanted to do differently from the comics. And I'm very happy with how
very happy with the direction that they took as well, because both the Stormfront and the not the Stormfront, both the Soldier Boy and the Stormfront characters, the Aya Cash character, who fun fact, those two are actually getting their own spin-off prequel that's taking place in the 50s, but Rising, which will be released sometime either later this year or next year. I believe they just finished filming it. And what's it called? So both of them are drastically different from their comic impersonation. Stormfront in the comics, I believe, was a male, and Soldier Boy in the comics was a lot dumber and a lot more cowardly. So I'm glad that they changed up those characters the way that they needed to. So that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about with these first 2 episodes. The only thing really left that I wanted to chat with you is some theories, some ideas that you may have as far as where this season could go. One of them could be right, none of them could be right. It's whatever. Just what are some thoughts that you may have as far as where the rest of this season is going to go leading up to the finale?
One character that really interests me is there's a couple, but it's tough. The one character I feel like is a wild card for me is Soldier Boy, with how he's going to interact with everyone. Like, it seems like what fascinates me about him is he just really has no loyalties, other than to himself. So it's just which side is going to piss him off more is like, I feel like he very much is that character that can help tip the scales in that regard. I wonder if he's going to be depowered from the virus, and maybe we'll kind of see him go through like a mini A-Train arc, where you have this big tough guy, he's always been like the strongest person around, and then suddenly, what is he without the powers, right? Kind of like what A-Train was saying to Homelander before he died. Maybe that's foreshadowing that Homelander will get depowered, which for me personally, I feel like that could be one of the most satisfying endings ever, is if Homelander just has to live without his powers. I feel like I feel like there's no scenario where he just does survive, just from all
Well,
the heinous
definitely.
things
Well,
he's
we knew that
done.
Homelander was going to die from pretty much the moment that he was introduced on the show. All the way back to him like fucking using his X-ray vision to watch Stillwell breastfeed. But the thing that's been set up since the first episode of season 3 is when Homelander has that meeting with Butcher in his apartment and basically says, the whole what if we had a different destiny, just you and me, mano a mano, scorched earth style. And obviously you were wondering like, okay, well, Butcher's still human. How the hell is that going to happen? And then obviously the Temp V fight and the Herogasm episode, and then Butcher now being a full-fledged soup with the V in his system and the tumor. So it still feels like that's what we're building to, is one end-all be-all mano-a-mano fight between Homelander and Butcher, where Butcher basically rips him apart. But it also feels like, again, that would be way too obvious and predictable. So like,
I think we'll definitely get some loops thrown in.
Yeah.
I think that's a very plausible scenario, but I feel like in usual Kripke fashion, we'll get, a bit of extra spice with it. Yeah, for sure. And I hope for nothing less, to be honest, because, everyone likes, a traditional story, but obviously, having those deviations that keep it original, but still keeping the themes really, I guess, true. I think, that's what you're here for as the audience. And, I think Annie is another character I'm very curious about her fate in general, about, the character she's going to become throughout this final season. Just everything she's been through and is willing to go through for the sake of saving the world. Is it worth it to kill 10,000 people to save 8 billion? Easy math says yes, but obviously we as the audience have got to know a good, some important characters of those 10,000, where we got a lot of bad options in front of us. There's really no easy decisions ahead of the characters. And I think that is, that's what you want in a story, is you want the choices to be tough. You want the choices to have consequences, because the consequences are really what's going to drive everything. So,
yeah. Thing that I'm most interested to see is, given that we're in the final stage of the show, obviously this is the final season, and knowing how the final stretch of the comics run went, there's a lot obviously that they've changed. Obviously they can't do the Black Noir twist from the comics because they've already deviated from that and shown who Black Noir is under the mask. But really for me, it's just like how the character deaths from the comics are going to match up to the deaths that inevitably, because obviously A-Train will not be the last character that dies before this season is wrapped. But it's going to be really interesting to see as well how, who else is going to hit the floor, and if they're going to hit the floor the same way that they did in the comics, and whether Butcher is going to prove to ultimately be the true villain, even more so than Homelander was, whether or not. Also, the Gen V characters, but they're an afterthought as far as I'm concerned. Like now the Gen V is basically announced itself as just filler material in between seasons of The Boys, which I was worried that it was going to be going into season 1. And season 1 was actually really good, but then season 2 pretty much is just like, what this show serves no purpose other than to just serve as filler material in between seasons of The Boys, which I'm like, all right, that's fine, but whatever. But yeah, I guess I'm just really interested to see kind of what other, if more so, less so on like plot points, what happens, like how much, like whether they're going to like kind of reground the rest of this season and kind of what made us fall in love with the show in the first place, which is the dynamics between these characters working to overcome an impossible goal, rather than just, gag after gag, mission after mission that just results in another gag and another ridiculous super gag, and actually like really like getting down to like the nitty gritty of like, okay, like which of these characters is going to make it ultimately. That's kind of what I'm the most interested in for this season going forward.
1000%. I'm really excited to see how they explore the, I guess, systemic issues, right? Where you can take down Homelander, you can take down all these soups, but at the end of the day, the entity of Vought is still going to exist in some way, right? And it's how do you ensure something like this never happens again? And that's something I really hope that the show touches on, and it feels like they're kind of touching on that, especially with Huey, and it feels like Huey will play a role in how to move forward, because I feel like Huey will be the one character that lives. Huey, beyond a shadow of a doubt to me is safe. Like I would be shocked if they killed him off, especially given that like him and Annie are like the only two left standing by the time the comics ran out. So I'll be very, very curious to see where that goes. Also, another character that's kind of just floating on the periphery, only popped up in one episode last season, was also in a couple episodes of Gen V, the Stan Edgar as well, who is currently still kind of keeping an eye on Newman's daughter for
for her after her
Right.
unfortunate demise. So that's another kind of loose overhanging thread. He obviously will be back this season. How the hell or what characters Jared Padalecki and Misha Collins are going to play in this last season, and really, again, how it's all going to build to kind of the inevitable conclusion. The other thing, too, also is Amazon shifted the release strategy. They usually release the first 3 episodes of The Boys. What's it called? So it's usually 8 episodes that aired over a 6-week period. This time they only aired the first 2, so we have 6 more weeks to cover as opposed to only 5 more. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of, why they chose to do that. Like, okay, what's going to happen in the next episode that really like shows like, oh man, like if they didn't want to release that with this batch, oh man, what the hell is going to happen with that? So
I can tell you why. It's just to get another month of subscription out of people. But
that, and also I think it's also the fact that they're doing a classic Emmys strategy, which is where they're trying to extend their overall natural runtime to as close to the end of the cycle, because they haven't been nominated for an Emmy since season 2, and they really have been kind of jaded since, and they are really angling for April. This is the earliest that the show has ever aired. So the last 2 seasons of the show aired over the summer. Seasons 3 and 4 were summer seasons. This is the earliest the show has ever aired. So the first season dropped all of its episodes in July of 2019. The second season aired in the fall of 2020, September through October, and then this is the earliest the show, and then the last 2 seasons were respectively summer. They aired about like beginning to middle of June when those 2 seasons aired. But this season is in April, so that they are prime in the Emmy window. But they are competing with a lot of stuff. They're competing with The Pitt. They're competing with Daredevil. They're competing with Invincible. They're competing with Monarch. They're competing with For All Mankind. Like, we are in the middle of a genre TV flood, the likes of which I have not seen in years. So it is going to be very, very interesting to see if this show can kind of rise above kind of the rest of its genre peers. Again, genre, like every other award ceremony, like every other, is always ignored by award ceremonies. So we will see ultimately. But again, we're not watching the show for its awards potential or anything like that. And to be quite frank, the people just do not watch or keep track of or frankly care about the Emmys in the same way that the Oscars do, simply by virtue of the fact that nobody can watch that much TV. So, yeah, with that being said, that's pretty much all that I have as far as these first premiere 2 episodes go. Eli, it was an absolute joy and a privilege having you back on. I feel like it has been forever since I've had you on, but we are going to be reconvening here every Wednesday night to recap the rest of this final season as we make our way through. And then, of course, we'll be back right at it again once this season wraps, because by the time this season wraps, we'll have a release date for House of the Dragon, and you can be damn well sure that we're going to be recapping every episode of that, because if there's one thing that you and I love more than The Boys, it's anything related to Thrones, and especially given where season 2 went, the pitfalls that had, and given all the shit that we're going to get this season for House of the Dragon from that stretch of fire and blood. Yeah, it's safe to say, like, we've got a lot to cover over the next few months.
Just started my 3rd reread of Game of Thrones, so or Song of Ice and Fire as it's titled for the book saga. So yeah, I'm very excited, and I've got some high expectations for this 3rd season.
They got a lot of making up to do after that last season.
They do.
Yeah,
so I'm excited. I'm excited to be back and to get recapping with you these next couple months. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And don't worry, we will be airing a lot earlier. Unfortunately, my work schedule and I'm going out of town this weekend, so the way that my work schedule we ended up doing this one really late. But the next couple of weeks, hopefully for the rest of the run, should air at like actually normal times when people will be able to watch. So Eli, with that being said, thank you once again for joining me. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Still no YouTube channel or anything. If anyone wants to follow me, shoot me a DM, whatever. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is E_Holicky, like it's spelled on the screen here, 45. That is E_HOLICKY 45. So yeah, happy to talk movie, TVs, books, storytelling in general. Always a big fan, and big passion of mine. So.
Absolutely. And you guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talking TV Podcast across all platforms. And oi, cunts. We'll see you next week for the next episode of The Boys. Oi, oi, oi. Cut. I love that. That was great. We'll see you guys next time.